King Kong Bundy passed away on Monday at the age of 63. WWE, in its tribute video to him, used a birth year of 1957, which is also the one listed on his Wikipedia page. But according to Bundy's sister, in the New York Times article that was talking about this, he was actually born in 1955, which would make him 63 years old, not 61. No cause of death has been released, but he died at his home. So whatever it was sudden. He was being advertised for an appearance at WrestleCon next month here in New York over WrestleMania weekend. His story is kind of an interesting one. He was bartending at the same time he was attending some community college classes, and he claims that he got a phone call from a wrestling recruiter. I'm not sure how he would have just randomly gotten a phone call from a wrestling recruiter. He claims it was an accident. But that conversation led to his getting involved in the wrestling business, and he started training with Larry Sharp over at the Monster Factory, and that's how he became a professional wrestler. And, before he ever hit it big in WWE, he had a run in World Class Championship Wrestling with the Von Erichs, and had Fritz Von Erich's final match, and that was back when he still had hair. It is so freaky to go back and look at video or photos of Bundy with a full head of hair on him. Believe it or not, he did have hair. He did not come out of his mother's womb looking like an egg. But in his debut match in WWE, he came to the ring wearing sunglasses and a cape. Sometimes people say, hey, Kane, when Kane first debuted and he had some house show matches before he came to television, he was wearing a cape, which is true. He wore a cape for at least one or two matches before he debuted on TV. Well, Bundy wore a cape too. Now picture Bundy wearing a cape and sunglasses indoors, which only douchebags do. But you look at him wearing this getup, it's like he could have been Frank Costanza's lawyer on Seinfeld. And he had Jimmy Hart as his manager when he initially debuted. He didn't think they were a good fit together. He didn't have anything against Jimmy, but he just didn't think the two of them made for a great pair. So he was very happy when WWE paired him with Bobby the Brain Heenan. They did a storyline on television where the two managers worked out a trade, sending Bundy to Bobby in exchange for Adrian Adonis and the missing link, who went missing not long after that. See, they don't call him the Brain for nothing. I think he got the better end of that trade. So, under the tutelage of Heenan, he had Bundy, he had Big John Studd, he had Andre the Giant, Ravishing Rick Rude, Mr. Perfect, not all at the same time, but all of those guys were members at one time or another of the Heenan family. And all 6 of these men, including Bobby Heenan, are now dead. Although the Heenan family stretches all the way back to the AWA. There's been a lot of different incarnations of the Heenan family. And so there's still plenty of Heenan family members around. They're not all dead. The Brainbusters are still around. Harley Race, even though he's not in the best of health, he's still around. Paul Orndorff, Haku, the Barbarian, Red Rooster, Brooklyn Brawler. Well, they can't all be winners. Gorilla Monsoon once dubbed him the walking condominium. And he was just a very bizarre person to look at. He had a very unique look about him. He was a large man. He was every bit of the 450 pounds that they billed him as. He had practically no neck. He really did look like a giant egg. He could have called him the Eggman, and it would have fit him perfectly. He had this gimmick, the 5 count, which he was using even before he came to WWE, where he would pin somebody, but a 3 count was never enough. And he would yell at the referee and put his hand up and say 5, and he would force the ref to count 4 and then count 5. And Big E was using that gimmick for a while down when he was coming up the ranks in NXT. And I remember talking about it at the time, even before he debuted, thinking, I hope he brings that gimmick up. I mean, it's been so long since anybody has used it on TV, since Bundy has used it. It could be something cool to help, get him over, and they just completely ditched it. I assume that wasn't his call, but Big E never did use the 5 count gimmick when he got called up to the main roster. For years, WWE credited Bundy with the fastest win in WrestleMania history over Special Delivery Jones at the very first show. 9 seconds, right? It's in the annals of WWE lore that Bundy pinned this man and beat him at Madison Square Garden that night in 9 seconds flat. Now, if you go back and watch the match, as I have many times over the years, and I watched it many times as a kid, I still have the Coliseum video in the original case with Hogan and Mr. T, the illustration on the front cover of the very first WrestleMania. That match ain't no 9 seconds. There is no way on any planet, any structure of time, that match lasted 9 seconds. If you watch it, I mean, you'd realize that unless you count to 9, and in between each number you recite the Pledge of Allegiance, there is no way that match lasted 9 seconds. It was somewhere around 23 or 24 seconds, which is a pretty big leap. We're not talking about 9 seconds and 12 seconds. I know WWE exaggerates, but even by those standards, that's quite the exaggeration. But they claimed it as 9. That record still stood until The Rock pinned Eric Rowan at WrestleMania 32 in just 6 seconds. Yes, The Rock's last, I don't know, however many WrestleMania opponents included the likes of Hulk Hogan, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Ric Flair, Randy Orton and Batista, John Cena, and Save the Earth Eric Rowan. What a combination. I was actually curious what the real shortest match ever is. You know, as I was just jotting down, WrestleMania 1 match, and then, I wanted to mention The Rock and Eric Rowan, and it got me thinking, what is the shortest match? Not even WrestleMania match. What is the shortest match, legit, in WWE history? And did a little bit of research here, and I think I may have found it. Now, there's no video of it. It was a house show match from the Boston Garden on December 14th, 1991. Bret Hart was the Intercontinental Champion at the time. He retained his title over the Mountie in 3 seconds. 3 seconds. It would be impossible for anybody to win a match in less time than that, unless, I guess, in the first second or two, they shot the referee or something. Otherwise, it's pretty hard to beat 3 seconds, but that's how it's listed. 3 seconds. That had to be, I assume, a quick roll-up for the pin. So unless somebody finds me one different and can prove me otherwise, that would be the quickest match ever in WWE history. Bundy was only 28 years old when he wrestled Hulk Hogan in the cage at WrestleMania 2, which is kind of crazy to think about because, yeah, he looked younger, but he didn't look that young. 28 years old, wasn't even 30 years old when he set foot in that cage against Hogan, and that was the first use of the blue bar cage. I grew up on that cage. I love that blue bar cage. Now, if I had to wrestle in it, I don't think I would have loved it as much because every single person from that era who ever wrestled in that cage in interviews over the years has talked about how unforgiving it was. It hurt like a bitch. I assume, though, that the reason they changed it over, and I don't know if it was one of the wrestlers who asked for it or if it was just the Vince McMahon call, WWE back then was the land of the giants with guys like Bundy and Andre and Hogan, who was no small man. And the idea of them climbing the mesh fence, the mesh cage that they use now and they used to use back in the day, how would King Kong Bundy ever be able to climb a cage like that? It would be impossible. So I assume because of just how freaking large these guys were, they decided to change the cage. And I guess there's people out there who don't like it. They hate it. They like the more traditional cage. I always preferred the square sort of blue bar cage, and I kind of wish they would bring it back. But again, if it was hurting people, I guess maybe that isn't the smartest thing to be doing. But that was the first instance, I think, of them using that kind of cage at that WrestleMania. Now, Bundy once claimed that he made $50 for doing 3 job matches very early in his WWE career. This is going back to when it was the WWF. And then he left and he went to World Class. Eventually he came back. So in those early days, he made $50 for doing 3 job matches. He made $50,000 for the cage match with Hogan at WrestleMania 2. And I'm sure that 50 grand paled in comparison to whatever Hogan made. But still, that's quite the journey. From $50 for 3 matches to $50,000 for 1 match for the world title. At WrestleMania 3, fast forward a year, it was Bundy, Little Tokyo, and Lord Littlebrook. Always got to get the word little in there. Against Hillbilly Jim, Little Beaver, And the Haiti Kid. Well, the Haiti Kid is special. He doesn't have the word little. We'll call him the Little Haiti Kid. That was the match at WrestleMania. It was a 3-minute match, but one of the matches that Bundy is most remembered for, and really one of the more famous matches in WrestleMania history, when he picked up and slammed Little Beaver. Bundy slammed Beaver at WrestleMania. And Beaver was all of, 4 feet tall. He dropped an elbow. 450 pounds, he dropped an elbow on Beaver. And Bundy, again, was 450 pounds. Kevin Dunn couldn't have been, or Beaver couldn't have been more than 60 or 70 pounds. Little guy. And Beaver never wrestled again after that. Instead, he retired to the WWE production truck. But he died in 95. He passed away in 95. I think it was emphysema as the listed cause of death online. And a few years after that, Bundy said that he hoped he wasn't responsible for his death because he didn't want to have that on his conscience. So I don't think he knew what the cause of death was. He just heard that this was a few years after he died. He goes, oh shit, I hope it wasn't because of me. Because again, he never wrestled after that WrestleMania 3 match. That was pretty much his in-ring retirement. He beat Hogan, did Bundy, by countout on one of the early editions of Saturday Night's Main Event. This was in November of 1987. And then came the rematch. Hogan versus Bundy on the January 2nd, 1988 episode of Saturday Night's Main Event. The reason I bring this up is because it is one of my earliest wrestling memories, and it scared the living shit out of me as a kid. When that match was over and Hogan beat Bundy and he's in the ring and he's posing, Andre had been out at ringside in Bundy's corner. And he was wearing this weird, checkered jacket. I remember Andre's wearing this sport coat over a shirt that he is sweating through. I mean, sweating profusely through this shirt. And Hogan's teasing him, come on in, big man. Andre's like, nah, I'm not going to come in. He decides to leave. As Hogan is in the ring posing and has his back turned, Andre comes back. And he steps over the top rope into the ring. He grabs Hogan by the neck from behind. And he begins to choke the life out of Hulk Hogan. And the locker room emptied out, the Bulldogs and I think Jake, and eventually it was Jim Duggan who broke a 2x4 over Andre's back. Nobody could pry this guy off of Hogan. And I remember as a young wrestling fan back then watching this, and this man is choking, he can't breathe. I thought he was going to kill him. I mean, it's still, when I think back, I'm still kind of haunted by this memory, and that was one of the earliest, I guess, most traumatic experiences of my young wrestling life, but it came that night after the match between Hogan and Bundy. Now, why did Bundy leave WWE the first time? He left the company in '88. Well, according to Bundy, he filmed a television commercial because he had been on. He had done some acting stuff, and I guess he caught some people's attention. And there was some Dutch computer company who wanted him for a commercial, for an advertisement. They were going to pay him for it. And Bundy figured, first of all, it's a payday for me. And it's going to air overseas. Vince will never find out about it. Well, Vince did find out about it, and he was not happy about it. Vince McMahon is a control freak. He did not want any of his talent doing anything outside of WWE. At least not without them clearing it first. Yet another in a long line of farcical examples of them being independent contractors. We could go all day with different examples of this. After that, he didn't get fired, but after that, his push basically whittled down to nothing. And think about it. After WrestleMania 3 and the whole thing with the midgets and everything, and then you get to the end of '87, the beginning of '88, that match on Saturday Night's Main Event I just talked about, there really was nothing else of note that Bundy did. He did the job to Hogan in that rematch. And I don't even think he was at WrestleMania. He wasn't at WrestleMania 4. His push whittled down to nothing. He saw the writing on the wall, and he left. He left the company. Originally, he was only going to be out for about a year, and then he figured he would come back. He went through some stuff. There was a divorce. There was some other personal stuff he went through. He was out of the business largely for 5 or 6 years. It would be 6 years before he came back to WWE in '94. As a member of Ted DiBiase's $1 Million Corporation. What a motley crew that was. You had King Kong Bundy, Bam Bam Bigelow, Sid Vicious, or Psycho Sid rather, 1, 2, 3 Kid. It was quite the collection of talent that DiBiase assembled there. WrestleMania 11. That was his last WrestleMania match. He wrestled The Undertaker. I'm not trying to speak ill of the dead here. I'm not talking about Undertaker. Even Bundy admitted in one of the many shoot interviews that he did. You know, when I talked about Honky Tonk Man going into the Hall of Fame, I gave the devil his due and I said the one thing I have to say about Honky Tonk Man, whatever kind of person he is, he gives an entertaining shoot interview. I have found myself in the past, kind of coming across little clips of him on YouTube, and he can be very entertaining. Well, Bundy also gave a hell of a shoot interview. And Bundy came across like a pretty straight arrow on a lot of stuff. So he's another one who, when I stumble across clips of his on YouTube, I usually stop and listen. And in one of the many interviews that he did, he said that the match with The Undertaker was shit. And I'm glad he said it, so I can say it too. The match was shit. Easily one of the worst Undertaker matches in WrestleMania history. I would even go as far as to say maybe the second worst. And that includes the match with Lesnar at WrestleMania 30, which was no good. The only match I would say was worse was the match at WrestleMania 9 that Undertaker had with Giant Gonzalez. I don't think it gets worse than that. But the match with Bundy, no good. No good. Bundy also has the distinction, and this is hardly his fault, so I'm not putting the blame on him for this, but he has the distinction of being part of one of the worst wrestling matches of all time on what is arguably the worst pay-per-view ever aired in the history of wrestling. The Heroes of Wrestling debacle back in 1999. It was originally going to be Jim Neidhart against Jake Roberts. That was going to be one of the featured matches on this show that was independently put together. It had nothing to do with WWE or any other big company. So they had Jim Neidhart was going to wrestle Jake the Snake, and Yokozuna was going to wrestle King Kong Bundy, which sounds like a terrible idea when you consider that Yokozuna by that point Yokozuna made King Kong Bundy look like a cruiserweight. He had to be pushing every bit of 800 pounds. I think at his peak, at his peak weight, Yoko was up to about 804. So when I say 800 pounds, now I've read he was 750, 760 for this show. When he died the following year, he passed away the following year, supposedly he was down just under 600, so he had actually lost a little bit of weight. But when you hear people talk about Yokozuna being 750 pounds, 800 pounds, I don't believe that to be an exaggeration, and if it is an exaggeration, they're not exaggerating by much. His weight was grossly out of control, and it's not a shock that he passed away so young. It's pretty obvious. It's not a healthy way to live. You cannot be that large and not expect that bad things are going to happen. The heart can only take so much. So Yoko, there was a reason that he had no business being in the ring. There were a lot of athletic commissions in different states across the country that would not allow him to wrestle. That's one of the reasons why WWE couldn't do anything with him and let him go. If this guy can't be sanctioned by the state athletic commissions to wrestle, then he's of no use. Now, Jake was so completely bombed on this show when he came out for his match with Neidhart. I don't even think he was barely able to stand up straight. I don't know how he was able to stand upright. Now, to try to save this, because they're live on pay-per-view, what the hell are we going to do here? Jake is a mess. So to try to save it, Bundy comes out. Right? This is before what would have been the Jake Neidhart match. They see what's going on. Bundy comes out, and they try to improvise by turning it into a tag team match. It's going to be Jake the Snake and Yokozuna against King Kong Bundy and Jim the Anvil Neidhart. And think about this. Of the 4 men in that match that night, 3 of them are dead. And the one left standing is Jake the Snake Roberts. Who the hell would have ever thought that? But if you watch him in this match, you would hardly even believe that was possible. Again, not Bundy's fault, but he does have the distinction of being part of the worst match ever. And as far as what happened, I'm sure many of you remember the whole, him holding the snake a certain way. It was a total disaster. I'm sure you could find clips of it online. Heroes of Wrestling, total debacle, worst pay-per-view ever. Bundy was actually a really good talker. I had a note here. I wanted to mention this because it doesn't get talked about enough. How good of a talker and a promo Bundy was on his own, and he had Jimmy Hart for a little while as a manager. He had Bobby Heenan as his manager for much of his WWE run. Even when he came back in 94 and 95, he had DiBiase with him. So he always had somebody with him. But he didn't need them necessarily to do the talking for him. A lot of those big guys couldn't talk worth a shit. Bundy was not one of those guys. And he was actually pretty funny. I used to love it when he would talk about Bundamania when he was feuding with Hogan. Bundamania is running wild. I don't know why I still laugh when I hear the word Bundamania. It's just funny. So he actually was a very good speaker. He appeared in 2 episodes of Married with Children, about 7 years apart. First as Uncle Irwin. He was a relative of Al's wife, Peggy. So he was part of the Wanker family. And then many years later, he came back to do an episode as himself. That was a wrestling-themed episode. The theme was that, or the plot was that Bud had to get his picture taken with King Kong Bundy as a way to get into his father's No Ma'am group. All you Married with Children fans out there know what No Ma'am is, the National Organization of Men Against Amazonian Masterhood. One of my father's favorite gifts, not gifts. I have to be specific here. One of his favorite gifts that he ever got was the No Ma'am shirt that I bought for him one year for his birthday, which I now have back in my possession. It's about 4 sizes too large to fit me, but I will always hold on to that shirt. It's got the No Ma'am logo on it, so I will never forget what No Ma'am stands for. So anyway, in this episode, Bud dresses up as a bumblebee. He's in a bumblebee costume. He has to try to get into the backstage area. He has to pretend that he's part of the show so he can get his picture taken with King Kong Bundy. And of course, what ends up happening, he ends up wrestling King Kong Bundy in the episode. The creators of Married with Children, those guys, Moy and Levitt, they were huge wrestling fans. That's where the Bundy name comes from. Al Bundy is named after King Kong Bundy. I know some people, there was a whole big controversy at the time because they thought that they had taken Ted Bundy's name, and they thought it was very distasteful to take this mass murderer's name. It wasn't Ted Bundy. It was named after King Kong Bundy. So, and then the Rhodes family in the early seasons, it was Steve and Marcy living, right across from Al and his family. Well, the Rhodes name comes from Dusty Rhodes. A lot of people, I don't think, realize that either. So I think that's really cool. Married with Children is one of my all-time favorite shows. He took a stand-up comedy class in 2006 and took his act on the road. So Bundy was doing comedy there for a while. I don't know if he was still doing it in recent years, but for a while, he was basically kind of an amateur stand-up comedian. He once told ESPN when they asked him, they said, "How long do you plan to do comedy for?" And his response was, "I'll do it until I drop dead." He was part of the concussion lawsuit that was brought against WWE, which may explain why to an extent, it explains why he was persona non grata with the company, like Demolition and all those guys who signed on to the concussion lawsuit. But that's bullshit, because long before that guy filed that concussion suit and everybody just kind of jumped on, WWE wasn't doing anything with Demolition. They weren't putting them in the Hall of Fame. They were barely acknowledging them. I was shocked they acknowledged them at all when the New Day was approaching their record as tag team champions, that they even mentioned Demolition on TV. Same thing with Bundy. Even before the lawsuit, they weren't doing anything with him. They never acknowledged him. So, the lawsuit didn't help, but I think it's also a cop-out to say that the reason WWE didn't do anything with them is because of the lawsuit. There were plenty of years before that where they also just seemed to be persona non grata for whatever reason. I know Axe of Demolition had his own lawsuit many years earlier against the company, but there are people that have done far worse to Vince McMahon who were brought back or put into the Hall of Fame. So there's just some weird things I just don't get. I don't get why they treat Demolition that way, or why Bundy was sort of treated that way, or why Victoria and Melina are never acknowledged. There are just these mysteries that I just don't quite understand. Seems very petty to me. He posted a tweet, Bundy did, in January, teasing a new podcast coming soon called The 5 Count. And he never did get to start that podcast. I think Bundy would have been the perfect person for a podcast. I really do. He just had that personality. He could tell stories. He had a great sense of humor. And it's a shame he never got the chance to do so. Now, sad tweet this week. Sad tweet of the week. Sad tweet of the year. Goes to Enzo Amore. @Real1 on Twitter. After the news broke of King Kong Bundy's death, Enzo, ever the wrestling historian, posted this heartfelt message with the hashtag King Kong Buddy. King Kong Buddy. What the fuck is a King Kong Buddy? I would love to know. I'm surprised he didn't post King Kong Bunny. But anyway, this is what he said. Rest in peace, King Kong Buddy. The epitome of pro wrestling. I recall going to shows at MSG with my grandparents. My grandma, Raffaella, loved him and hyped him up the whole ride in. Plenty of wrestlers risked it all that night, but I never forgot the guy with the green tongue who ate the turnbuckle. Of course, he is referring to George the Animal Steele, who died 2 years ago. He got his bald guys mixed up. Yeah, he'll tweet Stone Cold for his birthday in December. He'll say, "Oh, happy birthday to the greatest of all time. Got me into the biz watching you beat Hogan in the Georgia Dome. Hashtag consensual penis." Fucking idiot.